gonna take you here in time for that. That goes as well for the conversation on the top deck and the front of the boat. Please, if more you can help me with that one, that will be much appreciated.
Welcome everybody, thanks for joining us. I'm glad we're not doing this in the 100-degree weather we had 2 days ago, so good timing for everybody.
Yay!
Thanks for adding architecture to your afternoon. Look, I know I am completely architecture. I don't think it was completed in 1921.
Seriously?
Actually, it's two buildings. The one with the clock tower was done in 1921. They quickly needed more space and built the addition to the right in 1924. Obviously much older than that. It was built in 1920 and designed by Edward Bennett. It was part of a comprehensive plan of Chicago. Well, we're out of bridge houses on the bridges today. They're very different one from the other. They make up a really rich part of the streetscape down here along the riverfront. Let's direct our the curved front and a little round gazebo on top. Today that's a hotel, London House, Chicago. But when it was built back in 1923 and designed by Alfred Alston, a British insurance company, the London Guarantee and Accident Company, hence London House in its honor today, is to ancient Greek and Roman ideas. That little temple up top, you'll get another view when we come out from under the bridge. Looks like it could be a little Roman temple.
Oh, they have plastic bag.
And if you look right below the roof line, you see a procession of, you can make out carved wings. And if you look at street level right below, because they wanted to get deliveries off the street, the curved staircase, the railings, all very much Beaux-Art. We got the Beaux-Art style from latter 1800s in France. It made up a lot of the ideas that went into our 1909 plan of Chicago. Way up, a little dome up on top. This is 35, it dates back to 1926 by Yaver and Dinkelberg. Those rotundas halfway up, very ornamental, but they were actually practical when the building was built or moved in. And no, you can envision public access to the water. Nothing was built for decades. Riverwalk West here was completed between 2014 and 2016 and designed by Ross Barney Architects. Carol Ross Barney is one of the war. And that led us to the postmodern style. We have an example of a postmodern building ahead on the left, the tall building with the white roof line. This is from 1992. Postmodernism was popular from 1980 to 2000, so this is right in the middle. It brought back ornamentation and historic references, but it did it either in a simplified or exaggerated way. That little traditional column capitals. Parts coming out to the river, connected with the tall one in back. This is the LaSalle Wacker building from 1930. By Hummingbird and Root, and it's a style we know today as Art Deco. It was very popular. Forms dark vertical bands. Those alternate from this era that have a similar shape, set back shape. It was also good because it meant all over. And so if you look down on it, it's a giant square donut with a big hole in the middle, and that hole lets in light and air for the offices that face the interior of that building. This is 225, a West Wacker Drive by a firm we'll see a few times today, KPF. This dates to 1989. If you look at the towers up top, at the top of the building, it looks like it's divided into two towers with that glass in between them. So with the towers, the spires, the little round caps, it looks like two updated versions of the bridge houses that we have down here at water level. And that's another feat. In case you think I'm making all of this up, they even give you an imitation bridge running between those two towers with the little curved base, just to prove that they knew they're building here right along the Chicago River with all of our bridges.
Oh, that's good.
That goes the green of the Chicago River. Our river's green and not blue because of algae that grows in it. The building are expensive real estate. Here, the architects actually put the building equipment there so that nobody would be stuck with a super noisy office. So we're an arc cut out at the top. This is River Point from 2017. These buildings built since around 2000, we're simply saying are in the contemporary style. They're notable for structural innovations and their efforts rather than using references to history or detailed ornamentation. The red spiral sculpture there is a constellation by the world-famous Spanish architect Santiago. Since before 1900, they were part of our extensive freight system, still very much in use today for our commuter trains. And so if you look at those round holes around, like portholes, right, because we're on on the water, you can make out the fans that are venting out the diesel fume from the trains running below the platform in the building. Way back. And on the left, we have refrigerated trains and trucks. So in 1981, it was converted ahead of this on the left, the low slope. Weiss was an avid, he was actually the developer. He bought this property. He envisioned that this could all become residential. If you look over on the living along the river has become an asset. And if you look right along the river, a railroad warehouse company in 1909, anytime you see balconies on a building like that, you can be pretty sure it's been converted to residential today. Another example of adaptive reuse. And take a look. You'll notice everybody has a private patio, but this was converted in 1995, 3 years before the public access requirement. So there's no public walkway along the river here. And it's an example of why it's so hard for us to create a really continuous river walk all the way along the parts of the river where the land is privately owned. Newer columns inside and give people much more open floor plans that they want for their apartments today. Water, Lake Michigan. In the 1830s, when the land was all 2002, after the company went out on the floor to create the required public access to the riverfront. But the real reason they had moved up here was that they needed space for all of their good ideas. This was converted to offices in 2002. It includes the headquarters of Groupon. As we make the turn, let me see if they've got a barge loaded up with some of their supplies. Sand or gravel, you'll come into view as we finish making the turn. The crane up above it, that's where you get into the turn. See a green statue of a woman. That's a symbol of the old Montgomery Ward Company. She's the spirit of progress. And behind her, the building with the big white ends, that's the last building the company built up here for their then new admin building in 1974. Its own foundation down to bedrock to stabilize it. Look, it's no secret that newspapers are on hard times these days. Later in the tour, we're going to see the very first casino and seed performance space, plus a beautiful new temporary facility. They will be doing the test runs before our gaming commission on Labor Day weekend, and they will be opening the temporary facility in River North, hopefully by the end of September. January of 1900, they dynamited out a little retaining dam. Lake water flooded the canal, and our river has flowed backwards ever since. That it pivots on. So there's a counterweight hidden in the bank, and that goes down to balance the weight of the roadway as the road rises. Those counterweights are so sensitive, every 10 years or so when they repaint the bridge, raised position, the railroad company still owns the right-of-way, and so transportation law says they have to bring it down one day a year and make sure it still works. I've been under this bridge a lot. I do not think I would want to be up there on it when they test it. What can you do though? Those property rights must... It's 150 North Riverside from 2017. By Getch Partners. It's on a little bit of land that people have said since not seen it yet on the side of the boat. We'll be there in a moment. But I'm going to pause for a minute. I want everybody to look back down the main. All right, now over here on our right, we've got 150 North room there was for a foundation. That's the bottom of a concrete spine that runs up the building to support it. The base stands on 16 enormous concrete columns called caissons. Those have to go down 110 feet, 33 meters to hit bedrock to stabilize the building. And then behind the slope is steel girders. They flare out, they catch the weight at the outside of the building, and that's our train. And now you know why there are no offices on the first building. And now think about this. Too small a lot to build on, a 54-story building, and 3/4 of the land at ground level is still open for public use. Bank of America Tower from 2020, same architects, Getch Partners. They wanted to fill the whole lot to get the expressive trident design, and so the building only touches the ground at 3 points along the river walk, leaving it almost completely open for viewing. I think you can see why we say these contemporary buildings are notable for their structural innovations. That glass, the stepped out profile is because the lot gets... And each place that the glass steps out, it's an advantage to the developer because each of those steps gives you corner offices, which can rent for more money. Approached in white. If you look above the name of the building in the fake balcony, you can see the masks of comedy and tragedy
it's
carved
fake,
in
right?
What's going on.
Okay.
Back style we talked about before. The offices were included to help subsidize the opera company. Rent from the offices could pay for opera expense a couple of years. Fortunately for Chicago, the complex went up between the 1960s and early 80s. The idea of building buildings over train tracks started in Illinois in the late 1920s, when our courts said that the people who owned the land, here the railroad company, had the right to sell or lease the air above their land. So you can see the trains underneath, the platform, and the buildings above them. Now these first two buildings, we're not seeing the real structural steel. That's hidden behind fireproofing, and it's just not the old traditional style. The closest we lighter and cheaper than steel, and it's more malleable, so it becomes a much more common building material. And that's not an ordinary reflection. Every window on that fourth building is pinched at the four corners so that the reflections on it ripple, just like reflections ripple on the river. And so that's a sign we've left mid-century modern and we're now in the postmodern era. This is done in 1923. There's a curve in the building, an asymmetric curve. Mies van der Rohe would have never done anything asymmetric curves up ahead of us. And a thing on the right after the done in 1921, most of what we see 1934, again, Art Deco, Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Great for bringing in the mail and taking out the packages, but it's even more complicated than that. If you look directly ahead of us, you will see there's a road, 9 plan. They had envisioned a grand boulevard here to go out to a new civic center. It was never built, but it was still a possibility when they did. It's becoming a new residential neighborhood called South Bank. You can see they've already built their elevated river walk. 2 of the 5 buildings are done. Up ahead of us there's a brown building, and to its left is a building with a zigzag profile. Both of those buildings are trying to be a little friendlier to the environment. They were trying to counter decades of a culture of people having moved out to the suburbs. And so they created what they called a city in a city. Everything you needed was here. Your apartments, your parking, offices, shopping, all trying to lure people back into downtown. The architect here was Bertrand Goldberg, a mid-century modern architect, but very different from Mies van der Rohe. Almost always used curves, which he thought were more organic in form, and very often was using exposed concrete for his building material. Well, on this quiet stretch of the river, I'm going to ask, imagine thousands of people fleeing. Spark started another fire. This one was not contained because everything went wrong. Our people homeless. And people came here for the construction work, including talented young architects and engineers, descendant of that legacy that started with those architects here in Chicago in 1880. This is the Whitmore, Owings and Merrill again, a real mid-century modern. Tallest building in the world, held that title for more than 20 years. It's still Chicago's tallest building today, and it's right in front of a mid-century modern icon. If you look at the pink building with the 311 South Wacker Drive from 1990, and this is the same postmodern firm we saw back up at the confluence. The statue up there is the Roman goddess Ceres. She's the goddess of agriculture. That's where we get cereal from Ceres. And she's up there to remind us that the Board of Trade, founded way back in 1848, basically invented what we know today as commodities trading with the sale of wheat. And with all that sale of wheat, we started developing a banking sector and investors and insurance companies. And so early on, Chicago had a financial services sector. That became really important to the city 100 years later. Some of you may remember that the Midwest went through a terrible manufacturing recession. And because Chicago had a diversified economy, we were able to fare better than many of our mission and energy, like the movement of the cars on the highway that runs right underneath it. The opposite side, the back side of that building is completely flat. So again, a mass in its distinctive profile. Side of the building facing the river, just a few floors down from the top, there's some fuzzy things hanging out from the side of the building. Those are 4 glass boxes that stick out. And apparently otherwise sane people step out into the glass boxes for what they think is the pleasure of looking straight down 103 floors to street level. So for those of you who've been, when we get off the boat, you'll have to tell me how it was. You will never catch me out there. This is just an office building from 1971. That's the elevator shaft. Nothing was back there originally, but they renovated. We're out here enjoying the river, and so they gave us a little something to give us their attention. It's cut its electric underneath. They found places for the columns, and the tower went up. With the lower section projecting towards us, the front left, the building actually the tracks take a turn under the building, and there was no place to put a foundation. And so those white angled girders were suspended from the middle of the building, and the left side of the building hangs from above. Plaza from 1929 by Holabird and Root, originally the home of the Chicago Daily News, a great Art Deco building built over train tracks. One of the first two buildings built over train tracks right after our courts said that you could go ahead and do that in the 1920s. You know, as you look at these Art Deco buildings, you can see how simple the mid-century modern style, but they're very much showing us this idea 3 inches to get it right. So another shout out to the engineers here, Magnus and Kremenchek, and they've got to be as responsible as Getch partners. So one more time, using your way back, a 2-story wooden inn. See all of the landscaping for their required. Up on the left, you see a building with a green pyramid on the... No, designed by Graham Anderson, Trojan White, built with funds from Chicago's most colored diamonds, the zigzags cut into stone, the octagon. But once again, timing was bad. 1930, we entered the Great Depression. It never a woman named Joseph Kennedy. That's the father today. Completed in 1914 for a wholesale food company. Today, its office is the Reed Murdoch Center. But to my eye, it's one of our finest examples of our old industrial architecture. Look at the care that went into this. That little elegant pyramid on the roof line, balconies below the clocks, top floor of windows. They put those gentle arches. It creates a sense of a column for every bay of windows, and the two-tone. And so it's been protected. It'll stay like this as it gets surrounded. And we're looking way down the river. And a narrow, good dates way back to 1920. With the setback requirements, they have the narrow tower. They color it in a dark green terracotta, just like the color of a champagne bottle, and they top it off with the gold foil at the top. On our left, Goldberg's first apartments above, parking below. Goldberg's estate, you can now get a fine steak at Smith and Walensky. AMA Plaza, completed in 1971. It was built originally for the IBM Trump International Hotel and Tower, from 2009 by Skidmore, Owens and Merrill. We'll see the full tower when we're out at the lake. As the wind gusts down here at street level, they could not control. They had to cut the point up and turn it into the curved profile instead. Here at river level, we have their 3 levels of river access. The silver-clad round columns give us from the Chicago Tribune. This was their headquarters, built in 1925 by Howells and Hood. Last year, our residences. It was the result of a competition, the style of architecture, and in fact, it closely resembles a glass pavilion. This is the Apple Michigan Avenue store from 2017, just so classically an Apple Chicago affiliate. From 1989, by the building facing the river. The buildings we've been talking about that had been built 60 years before this. Everything on our right had been developed into train tracks, train yards, all the buildings from 100 years ago. And all that brick immediately makes the neighborhood warmer and more inviting than if these were just glass and steel towers. There's still one empty lot. You see a dark metal and glass curved tower from 1968 by Schipperite Heinrich. Schipperite and Heinrich were very young architects. One of them had worked with Mies van der Rohe, just so somehow everybody involved in that project nodded their heads and signed off on paperwork that said it improved the harbor. I don't get it. And just a couple of years later, that loophole was closed. It will stand out here by itself. I started built up to simulate aircraft carriers. When they were anchored, they stood side by side right about where we are now, so that Navy pilots could practice their takeoffs and landings over Lake Michigan. Remember, we've been invaded in Night Promenade. Lots of ships, dining ships go out from here as well. And the Ferris, some of you may know that the world's first Ferris wheel was built in Chicago in 1893 for a World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition. Paris had a World's Fair just a couple of years before they came up with nothing until to it, and I do mean small. The original Ferris wheel stood 30% taller. This whole building in the city. Feel free to get up to take a look. Tallest tower. You may see a couple of floors that you don't. They're going to stay that way. They'd started building the building. The foundation was down a couple of low floors. They're continuing to look at the engineering process. They got bad news from our old enemy, the wind. Boy, today we can appreciate this. That slender tower was going to sway too much for the crew staff. It supplements what had already been planned, which was at the top of that tower. Maybe not surprising, it's the same engineering. Notable aspect of despite the looking curve, every piece of glass is perfectly flat, and every piece of glass is perfectly vertical. The effect is caused by having each floor either 5 inches wide or into the lightest color on the wide floors, so you minimize heat and light that gets into the small apartments, and you maximize light that can get into the larger apartments. Middle tower there, the roof line is at the 70th floor. The people in the tall tower who bought the first floors created a duplex. As you heard at the beginning, I'm a volunteer. We all do this because we love sharing our heritage. As volunteers, we of economics and technology and culture over the centuries. And so with that in mind, I invite you to do 2 things as you leave. First, when you get home, if you haven't already, explore your own community because every place has a story to tell. And second, promise me you will come back and see the river again because we are clearly going to have dramatic changes in the years ahead. Hey, before we're done, how about a round of applause for the crew? They have to listen to us do this, I don't know how many times a day. And most importantly of all, thanks to all of you for spending your afternoon with us and choosing a tour with the Chicago Architecture Center. We love having you on board. Thank you so much.
The poet Carl Sandburg wrote about Chicago. More than 17,000 buildings were destroyed. 300 people had died, and a third of them